Okay. Oh, there we go. Here we go. I can see I've got a little bit of lag there as I was getting things ready for what we were doing. I don't know why I can see my head like that. I don't know. Can you see that as well? Who's going on there? Let me have a look on this to see what this is saying. 2, 3, and turn that down. And turn that on. Interesting. How fascinating. There we go. Well, okay. Welcome everybody to the drill down. Oh, no, wait. Why is this doing that? No. Okay. Now for some reason it's coming on okay. I wonder if it's gone back to being 20 seconds behind. I've gone ultra low latency, but it seems to be not liking that. Anyway, well, welcome everyone to Camden Haven Anglican Church Drill Down. As I've said a number of times, the drill down is when we look again at the passage that we considered on the previous Sunday, and we just try and walk through it a little bit more slowly so we can see what's going on there. Now, as I look at what's happening at the moment, I can see that, yeah, we've got a little bit of a lag. So I don't know why that's happening, but we will live with it and see how we go. So if you've got a question to ask, make sure you ask that question just slightly before you've articulated it so that we can at least address something a little bit closer to the time. Yay. All right, well, we're looking at part of Matthew's Gospel, which we're up to the part where Jesus has entered Jerusalem on a donkey, and this has really caused a scene. He's created a scene, really, you could say. And this scene that he has created is a scene saying, I'm the king. Now, the thing about donkeys is that there is a relationship between kingship and donkeys in the Old Testament in a number of different ways. And one particular bit, there's a relationship with two donkeys, and maybe we'll get to that. We'll see how we do that. But also, Saul is looking for donkeys when he finds Samuel and is made king. When Solomon is enthroned, his coronation, he is to get on David's donkey. So there's a number of different things there, and that's why I think Zechariah will talk about your king coming to you riding on a donkey. And I suppose one of the things about a donkey is not a war horse. It is, you would never really think of a donkey being a war horse, but you would think of a donkey being more like a peace horse sort of thing. It's not really this valiant, gallant type thing, but it's more a lowly donkey, that sort of thing. So I think there's the picture there of kingship. And then what Jesus does is he begins to cleanse the temple. He begins to turn the tables over and create a fuss. Another scene he's created. But significantly, we need to remember that he quotes Isaiah and he quotes Jeremiah. And in the quoting of Isaiah and Jeremiah, let's have a look at that. Let me just show you that. Let's go with this one because I can show it to you here. Whoa, that's big, isn't it? Triumphal entry. Where do we go? Here we go. So we've got here Jesus saying, said to them, it is written, my house will be called a house of prayer. Change the page, go over the top. House of prayer. And then that's verse what? That's verse 13. And we've got a little A there. So we go across to the A and we find here Isaiah 56 verse 7. Now, Isaiah 56 verse 7 is about the cleansing of the temple. Now, but you are making it a den of robbers. We've got a little B there, so we go across to the B and we look up Jeremiah 7:11, and this is actually talking about the destruction and rebuilding of the temple. So what Matthew is doing is combining two verses, one from Isaiah and one from Jeremiah, one about the cleansing of the temple and one about the destruction of the temple, and putting them together, and this is what Jesus is doing. So interesting to say, did Jesus say those things? Yes, probably did. If he didn't, though, it's still legitimate because Matthew is putting on Jesus' lips the interpretation for us of how we are to see this event. So Jesus is not just upset that there is money-changing tables there. There needed to be money-changing tables. Quite a practical, not an ungodly thing. The problem was probably where they were set. This was in the court of the Gentiles, and so hence Jesus saying, my house will be a house of prayer. In other Gospels, it is a house of prayer for all nations, and I suppose that would have been understood for those first readers. But that's sort of where we're coming from. So just keeping on giving you this context, that's the first day. Jesus then goes on from there, and it's a night time, then the next day, and that's when the next day when he sees the fig tree, and he curses the fig tree. And, don't feel too sorry for the fig tree, because essentially you're feeling sorry for the most famous fig tree in all of history, unless you count the fig tree in the Garden of Eden that they took figs to cover themselves with, maybe. But in some sense, this poor fig tree is actually the most popular fig tree ever in history. It's the one Jesus cursed. It was not producing fruit, and that's the whole idea. The fig tree represents Israel. The fig tree represents the temple more particularly, and on the temple would have been carvings of a fig tree to remind people of Eden, so that the temple was a place where you were returning to Eden, and it pictured, in some sense, the whole world back in Eden. When you would have read that as a first century person, or actually probably up to a 2nd century BC person, you would have understood that what is being pictured there in a place where God puts people is a temple situation. It's a worship situation. So it's not a Genesis 1 and 2 is not so much a picture, a geological picture or a geographical picture. It's a theological picture, and that is a liturgical picture, and that is it's about worship. And so here is the temple, people being thrown out of the temple. Here is the land, people being thrown out of the land, that sort of thing. It all begins to overlap. Now we've got Jesus going into that temple. Now remember, this is the second temple. The first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. This is the rebuilt temple by Herod. And when Herod rebuilt the temple, he rebuilt the temple. It was big. It was more glorious and amazing than you can possibly imagine. So it was extended from what it was. I'm going to turn that off. So that. It was extended from what it was, and when it was rebuilt after the destruction of the temple in Nebuchadnezzar's time. Remember what Jesus then does, and let's go back to this so I can show it to you here. They ask a question, and the question is, by what authority are you doing these things? They asked. They are the leaders of the religious leaders. They asked, and who gave you this authority? Well, everything that follows, all this, going through, next page, going through right up to about here, end of chapter 23, is the answer to that question about authority. And what Jesus is going to do first and foremost is he is going to first dismantle their authority. So although, remember how much we love the headings, the authority of Jesus questioned, well, what's actually happening is, yes, that reflects that one question there, but what happens in the whole context is Jesus is questioning the authority of the temple leaders, of the chief priests and the elders of the people. So it's actually sort of the other way around. The authority of the leaders is questioned by Jesus, and that's what we see. So we see these three parables that Jesus tells, one of the two sons, which one Jesus says to the leaders, is the right one, and they say, well, it's the one that said no at first, but then afterwards said yes. And then he says, well, you said no, but even after you saw, you did not repent, and that is even after you saw what John did, and in his righteousness. So they saw the evidence of John, and then didn't change. The next parable that Jesus is, remember, he's dismantling the authority of the leaders. He says this parable is about the vineyard. It's quite an important parable, and he brings them a question. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? Now, those tenants are the tenants that have not given him the fruit from the vineyard and have killed the servants who have come to collect the fruit. Now, the servants are the prophets. The tenants are Israel. Israel treated them badly, and even the son they reject. So even their own Jesus' question to them is saying, they agree he will bring those wretches to an end. So that they're self-condemning. Jesus says to them, don't forget about the Psalm 118, that Jesus is in Psalm 118 there is this rejected capstone which God is going to use as the foundation stone or the cornerstone for the new temple when that's built. Now, and we know that new temple, that stone is Jesus. He's the rejected one, and that Jesus is going to be the cornerstone which all of us have to be built on, to be built into this new temple that's going to be coming. So back here, we're wondering, is Jesus going to cleanse or is he going to destroy the temple? Well, he is destroying the temple, but only because he's going to cleanse it by building a new one, and that is one with living stones, of which he is the first stone of that living stone. We then came down to the parable of the banquet, and our key point was when he saw the man who was not dressed properly, and we looked at that last week. This again is a parable about the leaders of the time. They were not in uniform. They were wearing all the right clothes, but their hearts were far from him. They had failed to think about justice and mercy, and they were only thinking about themselves. They were feeding on the sheep rather than feeding the sheep. Okay, then we come to our passage today, and I'll go off that one. We come to our passage today, and we have a look at, so we'll go on to here. We'll head on down and see what we can find. Now, just first of all, see that then the Pharisees went. So what's happened before that? Well, like I said, Jesus has just told these three parables, and in these three parables, it has been dismantling their own authority, and they realize that he was talking about them. So they've really put themselves in it. The question, where did you get this authority? He has now dismantled their authority. It's now their turn to try and take Jesus out, and they're not taking Jesus out to dinner. They want to take him out. That is, get rid of him. And so they're trying to work out how to do that. So that's why they went and plotted how to entangle him in his words, because it's his words that are his power. So what do? They sent their disciples. So their disciples is the disciples of the Pharisees, and along with them the Herodians. Now what we need to see there is that these two were not good friends. They were enemies. The Herodians were pretty... They were... oh, excuse me. They were a political force, but they were a pretty weak political force. They really didn't have much power. But it's interesting that the Pharisees send in their disciples and the Herodians, which is sort of sending in the least of them. They're thinking, well, these guys will be able to deal with this. Let them go and do the dirty work. And so then we're going to see what the dirty work is. They call Jesus teacher already. He's not their teacher, but they call him teacher. We know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully. So again, you do not care. Let's do this for a minute. You do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. So isn't that interesting? The reputation of Jesus and his behaviour is, even to his enemies, quite admirable and blameless. And so they know he is these things. It's interesting, though, and I made this point on Sunday, that I think they use flattery to persuade Jesus, to lure him in, but their flattery is that he doesn't listen to flattery. So I don't know what they think they were able to do, but it didn't really work at all. Here we go. Here's the question. Tell us what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? There is the big question. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now, in the first century, the Roman oppression of the Israelites was made things difficult for Israelite life. And one of the things, their taxes would have been collected by soldiers, and not only by Roman soldiers, but they would be collected by traitors. So Jewish people were employed by the Roman government to collect taxes from the Jewish people. And these aren't taxes for, sanitation or that sort of thing, although Rome did bring those things. This was pretty harsh tax. And you're having this tax collected by a traitor, and this traitor is flanked by Roman soldiers. So as they knock on your door to ask for tax, they actually got to ask for the tax that Caesar wanted. You can imagine why there were a number of times when taxation was the presenting issue of opposition and violent opposition. So there was a guy called Judas the Galilean. Note, Jesus is also a Galilean. So Jesus probably knew Judas's family. This is not the Judas of Jesus' disciples. This is a different Judas, Judas the Galilean. Probably knew the family. There would have at least been some recollection or some knowledge of him. And Judas persuaded large swabs of Israelite men and women, families, to not pay tax to Rome. And that opposition was squashed pretty quickly and in a pretty bloody fashion. And so I think the question here that the Pharisees probably gave to their disciples and the Herodians to go and ask, they thought this was a shoo-in. They were going to trap Jesus. Jesus was going to have to, if he said yes, if he said no, don't pay tax, then he's going to be in trouble with the Romans. like Judas was. But if he says, yes, do pay tax, then he's going to lose face with all those following him, because they want freedom from this oppression. Jesus very cleverly, after saying these things, aware of their malice, that's their malice in testing him. Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me a coin. Show me the coin for tax. And they brought him a denarius. You know what I should do? I'll go and get a denarius. Just a sec. Wait there. Don't go away. All right. I've got a denarius. Let's see if we can zoom in on it here. Whoa. Oh, sorry about that. There is a denarius. Let's get that focused on that. We'll go up a bit. So, there's my thumbnail. It's about as big as a thumbnail. That's a silver denarius. And this is in this Tiberian, 14 to 37 AD. So this is the time of Jesus. And you can see all bits and pieces here. I don't know what this is. I haven't actually read this. I'll have to read that. But there's the back of it. You can see there it says, around his head are the names and titles: Tiberius Caesar, son of the deified, that should be deified, Augustus. The reverse shows him mounted in a chariot. The chariot there, with the lettering there, meaning his 16th tribunician power, imperator 7 times. So anyway, there's the sort of coin that would have been brought to Jesus. So you can see that. Let's just have a look. Let's just ask this question that I can see. Oh, I didn't do that. I really wanted to, let me just do something here. I didn't set this up beforehand. Let me do that now. Add data source, choose live tube, and there, add data source. And let's put that one up. Yeah. So Ellen says they knew he wasn't into politics. Tricky. I think there is really no way that we can listen to Jesus' words and not see how it crosses into the political realm. So Jesus was very political at the time. The things that he said about the leaders, the things that, the ways that he dealt with Rome, that sort of thing. He wasn't political in the sense that he was trying to build a political kingdom, a political position and take power that way. But the whole phrase, Jesus is Lord, that's a political topic. That's Jesus is King. And you don't get any more political than that, in fact. So, yeah, good point, but I think it needs to be nuanced a little. All right, let's go back to our passage. I can see we're quite a little bit way behind, so in terms of the timing there, so I don't know why that's doing that. Anyway, that's all right. Why do you put me to the test? Show me the coin. And they brought him a denarius, which I've just showed you. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And here's the cleverness of this. Render to Caesar. This word render is the word give. And in the Greek, it's actually better translated give back. And the significance of that give back is that there is this sense that you could have heard those words and said, Caesar's hit you, you hit him back. You give back Caesar everything that he's given you. And if you were a zealot, if you were someone who was, pretty disturbed about the things that Caesar's done in your community and in your country, you might rise up like a zealot and want to attack him and say, okay, Jesus is saying don't pay tax. However, at the same time, what we need to remember is that Caesar actually did give a lot to the people. He gave them, as we said on Sunday, sanitation, irrigation, fresh water, order, and so that it was safe to walk around at night because the Roman soldiers would have been patrolling, that sort of thing. There's a whole bunch of things. There's what's called the Pax Romana, which is the peace of Rome, Pax Romana. By the way, Drill Down will not be on for the next few weeks because I'm going to Rome, Rome and Greece. So next Wednesday, about this time, I'm going to be sitting at Sydney Airport, ready to fly off. And so you can come online if you want, but I'm not going to be here. So I'm sorry about that, but I don't know. Maybe I'll be able to work out something from overseas. We'll see how that goes. Probably not, because the internet won't be great in the hotels that we're staying at. He did all he needed to say with these words, and notice when they heard it, they marvelled. Then they left him. And this is important to see. Then they left him. Okay, so we're going to see this defeat happening. So round one, Pharisees come, Jesus defeats them. I think I left out the point that to give back, if Caesar has given good, then give back good. So actually pay tax. Learn to live in the land that's under occupation and seek the welfare of the people. Sadducees ask about the resurrection. Well, we don't ever like headings, because what that does is just makes you think this is separate now, this is a new thing, but it's not a new thing. It's the next question in a series of 3 questions that is going to come against Jesus. So the same day, the Sadducees came to him, who say there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up the offspring for his brother. Yes, that's exactly what the Old Testament says in the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, there were 7 brothers. Here's the situation. 7 brothers. Among us, the first married and died, and having no offspring, he left his wife to his brother. That left his wife is not really a great way of putting that, but you can see there's a little bit of patriarchy going on there, that you actually own your wife and you leave her as a possession to something. So to the second and third, down to the 7th. So this poor woman has had 7 husbands. They've all died and exhausted all the brothers. So there is this is going to be a problem. So you see what's happened is that Sadducees are saying they've followed the law. They've done the right thing by having all these brothers. Now they're going to say, in the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? Now, can I move that? No, I can't. So I'm just going to do that. Get rid of that. Oops, didn't stay there. Whose wife will she be? So in a sense, it's really saying the resurrection is silly, and the first 5 books of the Bible, which is what the Sadducees considered and limited their Bible to. Lucky duck going to Rome. Yeah, I know. I'll have a bit of pizza for you. Listen carefully to what's going on. The Sadducees are trying to prove the foolishness of any sense of resurrection, and they are saying in their scriptures, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah or the law, those are the names of it, there is no mention of resurrection. And they want to prove that by saying, okay, here's a law, and that law is that a brother needs to take responsibility for if his brother's died for the family, for that wife. And so they're saying if there is a resurrection, you've then got a problem because the law says one wife only, but now in a resurrection, if that's true, you've got one woman with 7 wives. So you can see how they're trying to show that the first 5 books of the Bible give an impossible scenario for if you were to obey the law and take on your brother's responsibility with his wife to keep the family line going, that in the end you're going to be breaking the law because you're one of 7 husbands. So I hope that makes sense, but you can see how they're trying to trick him in his words. Let's see Jesus' answer. But Jesus answered them, "You are wrong." We don't say that today, do we? You are wrong. We just say, "Oh, that's a good point, but maybe there's another way to think about it." Jesus says, "You're wrong." Why? Because you neither know what? The scriptures nor the power of God. So those are the 2 things that they don't know. First of all, it says, "For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven." So what we've got here is let me just highlight this colour so that we've got here. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. I suppose the first point here that Jesus is saying is that there is actually a trajectory of relationship that does not terminate in marriage. Let me say that in another way. Marriage is a good goal for this life, but it is not the ultimate goal and the ultimate state of affairs or the ultimate condition that we will be in forever. I think one of the things I wrestle with a little bit in this is that we take this passage and all we remember is this bit and we go, well, you're not married in heaven. Which I sort of feel like is really unhelpful because, you might have had a couple married for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever. It doesn't really matter how long they've been married, happily married. And you say to them, yes, well, in the new creation or in heaven, as it says there, for in the resurrection, actually, in the resurrection, you won't be married. I want to say that in the resurrection, there is every sense that we will understand who people are and that we had particularly special relationships with that person. So if you were married and now your husband or wife has died, if that's not the end of the relationship will continue in the resurrection. It won't be called marriage, but it won't be less. So it'll be better. And I think that's a good and important thing because we've got to look forward to a relationship with loved ones that will actually be better than the present relationship we even have. So I think I would just be careful that we don't read too much from this one sentence that Jesus gives. We can read something, but don't read too much of it. But just to realise that that is not the point of the response. Jesus is saying their understanding of resurrection is wrong. They've misunderstood resurrection. And so the whole thing that they base themselves on is not believing in it. He's almost saying, well, what you're not believing in is not what actually resurrection is. So he sort of caught them there. But the second part here is that as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you? So he's really saying in your scriptures, in those first 5 books, by God, and here's the point, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. Now, all of that is caught up in this word, I am. What that's saying is that in their scriptures, Moses has written about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who have died, that God did not, I was the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, but I am. I am the God of people who have passed. The fact that he doesn't say, I was the God, tends to suggest very strongly that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have somehow experienced resurrection and are living. Hence, the following part, yes, he is not God of the dead, but of the living. And if he is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So if he is the God, so the Sadducees would have said, yes, he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jesus is saying, well, are you saying he's the God of the dead? Well, they say, well, no, he's the God of the living. Well, if he's the God of the living, then they must be in some sense resurrected, because they've died but are alive. So you can see how Jesus caught them out there. Let's see what this is about. Ellen says, I want to be married to Dave in heaven. If we can't be married, will we still be able to hang out together? Well, you better ask Dave about that, because better check he wants to hang out with you. First of all, I just want to say, will we still, in heaven, keep thinking new creation. We're not going, nobody goes to heaven. Heaven comes to us. And so it's new creation. So there is some new form of our existence, which is not less than we are now, but more than we are now, but consistent. There's continuity, but discontinuity. But that discontinuity is not less, like in the sense of a ghostly, ghastly thing that spirit waffling around. But no, there's more to us. Notice that Jesus, in his resurrected body, was able to move in and out of a locked room, was be able to disappear and reappear. It's quite incredible what is going on there. I don't know, I was thinking about it last week, thinking possibly there might be some relationship between our existence. This is just conjecture. This is me just waffling. Our resurrection state, if we're called up into the very being of God, we are in Christ now, and Jesus says, as you are in me and as I'm in you, Lord, may they also be in us. So there's this really intimate connection, that intimate connection will continue and grow into the new creation, so after death and in the resurrection. And so I wonder if it's possible that our experience might be something like what God's experience is. He is in everything. He is able to, he knows everything. He's everywhere. I'm not saying we're going to be God, but I'm saying that maybe our existence is going to be somewhat aligned with the type of existence he has, seeing we're caught up into his very being, into the perichoretic dance, as it's called, the perichoresis, the around the being of God. Anyway, that's just conjecture. Let's see what Penny has to say. Is it really important even to think about continuing relationships with other humans? I don't know where you're getting that idea. I think I would get that idea. First of all, I don't think God deletes our history, nor does he delete our capacity for relationship. If it's unlikely that he deletes our history and that our capacity for relationship is enhanced in the new creation, then I think our relationships with other human beings will be very, very real. better than you can possibly imagine. It's conjecture, and I don't think it's a peripheral point. I think it's a point that the Sadducees would have wrestled with, say, what is this new creation like? What is this going on about? Anyway, yes, great discussion, but we should move on. When the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teachings. Now again, before we saw that, they were amazed. Now they're astonished. And now we get to this one. This one is the last one where the Pharisees send an expert in the law. So you can see that, or a lawyer, as it says here. You can see that they've sort of ramped things up. So they've gone, right, we've sent in our first line disciples who are, our weakest ones, and they got them. And then they got the Sadducees. They thought, we better go all guns in here quickly. Let's pull out the big guns. And what do they get out? They get a lawyer. Now, a lawyer simply means an expert in the law, doesn't it? And it doesn't mean a lawyer like we have a lawyer, although they'd be experts in our law. But this is an expert in the Old Testament. So here we have a person who's not only a Pharisee, who's not a Sadducee, because they were actually against each other. So the Pharisees actually believe in resurrection. They take the whole of the Old Testament. And now we've not only got that, but we've got an expert Pharisee coming to Jesus. So they're sending Jesus' very best. Now, and here's the discussion. One of them, a lawyer, an expert in the law, asked him the question to test him. Notice that, to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Hence, which one? Give me the one greatest commandment in the law. Now, I can't work out how this is a test because a number of different people had different opinions on what the greatest commandment in the law was. But it wasn't really, as far as we know, some sort of rallying point, or people just had an opinion. I think the Sabbath is. And if you thought the Sabbath was, you weren't necessarily aligning yourself with a particular party that you were going to get in a problem here. So I don't know how this is a test. But what we do know is how Jesus answered. What is the greatest commandment in the law from a lawyer who's an expert in the law? Tell me the greatest commandment. Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Now, others would have answered that way, but Jesus adds this, and the second is like it. That is the key part of this. What Jesus is doing, he asks for one law. Which law? Which is the greatest commandment? Singular. What Jesus does is then gives two. Love the Lord your God. You shall love the Lord your God. And you shall love your neighbour as yourself. Now here's I think the significant thing. This is the significant thing. So let me find, let's make it, let's go back to yellow. This is super important. A second is like it is not meaning, this is something that's sort of not the same but like it. This is saying these two commandments are inseparable. And I don't know if it's the first time that these two have been brought together. I have a hunch that it's not. But what Jesus did is bring them together. And I think in the context of the lawyer, the expert in the law's question, is actually exposing him to not be much of an expert in the law at all. Because to love neighbour is to love God. You can't love God without loving your neighbour. So wherever there is not love for another human, that diminishes your love for God. I think this is really important and something that's a challenge to me every single time I ever hear it. Ellen says, when Jesus answered that question, was it the first time they'd ever heard those words? No. The expert in the law would have known that those verses. He certainly would have known those verses. I think, though, that with Jesus bringing those two things together really ends up exposing him. Here is an expert in the law who's not keeping the law because he's trying to trap Jesus in his words, and that's not loving. So I think that is the guts of it. And that's why I think he walks away, in a sense, unknowing. I just realised it's quarter past. Our time is up. My goodness, so I'm going to rush through this, not because it's rush-worthy. And this is how they finished. Now, as the Pharisees were gathered together, this word gathered recalls some sense of Psalm 2, where the nations gather around to oppose the Lord's anointed. Jesus asks them a question, saying, what do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He then says to them, how is it then that David in the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. Now the question here is, who is that Lord? And who is that Lord? Is Jesus saying the Lord said to my Lord, that God talked to God himself? And no, here is what I think. It's complicated and I might be wrong, but I'm offering this to you to see what you think. The Lord is what we would say is God, the Lord God, his Father. My Lord here is Solomon. And Solomon is the only king that becomes king while the previous king was still alive. What happened in the past and what happened, and that is in the new monarchy from the son of David. So you could say that sort of happens with Saul because Saul is still alive and David's anointed king. So there is a crossover there. And then the Christ, David, the king, is persecuted by the old king. That's a good point, which I've just come up with. But think about that. But I think what's happening here is that whatever that's saying, Solomon becomes king. Solomon becomes king while David is still king, and this passage may have been penned by David at that coronation as he's speaking to Solomon, saying, may you sit in the seat of power until all your enemies are brought under your feet. And this is a reinforcing of 2 Samuel 7, the 2 Samuel 7:14, the promise of God that David would always have a son who would rule, and eventually are ruling forever, which is, we know, Jesus, the son of David. And the New Testament will say that actually the gospel is Jesus, son of David, raised from the dead, or raised from the dead, son of David. So that is the eternal king. That's the gospel. And so it's about following that king. Here we've got, sit at my right hand until I put our enemies under your feet. And then he's saying here that if David calls him Lord, how is he his son? So you don't call your son Lord, Master, but we say there is a greater son coming, and Jesus is saying he is that greater son, that greater David, that greater Solomon. And Solomon is known for the one who built the temple, and Jesus is going to be the first stone in that temple. No one was able to answer him a word. From that day on, nor from that day on did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. Well, there we go. There's the passage for today. And we've dived a little bit deeper into it. We've even seen a denarius, and we've thought about these bits and pieces. Now, there is a comment here. Let's have a look at that. And don't you think it's amazing that our legal system today is still based on those words? Lord Atkins' famous speech, "Who is your neighbour?" Yeah, good on you, Ellen. Spot on. We are the inheritors of a law of grace and love that has shaped the Ten Commandments. The teaching of Jesus has shaped the law that we have today. And so we give God great thanks for the society that we live in that is profoundly, almost invisibly, but profoundly Christian. All right, I've already gone over time, so I give you all permission to eat ice cream tonight because you've dealt with me an extra 7 minutes. All right, thank you, everybody. Been good to be with you. Remember, won't see you next week. For the next few weeks, we'll have a break, and I will give notice when I'm back that we're going to be back into this. All good? Good to see you, and see you later. I think that might have been pretty loud. Anyway, see ya.